Well, welcome, Mitch. It's so great to have you on our podcast. Great to see you here.
Well, thank you for having
How
me,
are things
Paula.
going today?
Things are always good, and it's a pleasure to be here with you, Paula. I just love sitting and talking to you. So it's nice if people could hear our wonderful exchange because I look forward to it all the time.
Excellent. Well, I'm really actually looking forward to getting to know your story because we've known each other for a while, but I don't think I know your full mindfulness story. So why don't you tell us, Mitch, what drew you to mindfulness in the first place? When did you start practicing and what was going on for you at that time?
Well, I started in dating myself, but I started around 1975. I was around 19 years old at the time, 18, 19 years old. And I'd like to say I had this really altruistic, wonderful, spiritual reason to start meditating. But like with a lot of 18 and 19-year-old guys, it was because there was a cute girl teaching it. And we... So at that time, transcendental meditation was the only one, the main thing that was around at the time. And it was cool because the Beatles were doing it, and the Rolling Stones were doing it, and Mia Farrow was doing it. All these people were doing it. And so I was introduced to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi way of doing transcendental meditation. And it was a couple of my friends were initiated at the same time as me. And we did that for a while. I grew a little disillusioned. I don't mean to diss anybody who's still taking TM, but I just sort of left. And I was a little
I think that
disillusioned.
might be a very common experience for some people that some of our listeners, that you go into mindfulness thinking that it's going to give you some sort of benefit or power, or that it's something very special, and then there's a sort of disillusionment. And I wonder if that's a place where some people might just say, forget it altogether, and but what was your experience? You obviously you stuck with it. So how did you manage that?
Well, there was a couple of years where
I guess.
Well, there was a couple of years where I didn't stick with it, but I was always interested. I went to school. I started in school in University of McGill, same as you, I believe, in philosophy and comparative religions. And so because of that, I was still studying Eastern philosophy and Eastern thought. Sort of was always kind of my hobby, and so I at that point I sort of was in I was in the Taoistic part of my life, and we would and I would be studying the Tao Te Ching and all these concepts of Taoism, which led me to Buddhism and Shintoism, all that sort of stuff, which led me back to meditation, where I realized there are other ancient methods and techniques that are not TM based, and after studying the philosophical part, it's very easy to intellectualize the process, but the process is so non-intellectual and more experiential that I said, okay, well, I better start. If I really want to investigate the thought, the Eastern thought, I really should go back to meditation, but go to a more ancient practice rather than TM, and that's something a more Buddhist or Taoist type meditation. That's what kind of led me down that road, and along the way ran into some Hindu stuff, which I still might use today. Some stuff from Ram Dass, some stuff from self-inquiry from Maharana, and a few of those people, and that's basically was my path.
Interesting. So at that point, you mentioned you started out because there was a girl that you liked that was teaching. So it was, I guess, about connection at that point. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if your motivation for practice was a little bit different this time. So we look at in TME that there's different things that you can get out of your mindfulness practice, or that you might be looking for, like minimizing suffering, maximizing fulfillment, understanding yourself, mastery in some aspect of your life, or connection. Was this more about understanding yourself because you were studying the Eastern philosophies, or what would you say your motivation was at that point?
I think you nailed it right on there. It was understanding myself and my place in the universe, and how that interacts, and the concept of self, and the concept of duality, and the concept of God, and the concept of all those things. That's what kept me going. Was after growing up in a traditional Jewish household, and realizing that didn't give me the answers I was looking for, it just gave me more questions. I was always looking for more, and understanding the self became a really important part of my meditation, my mindfulness, and hopefully my morality and my virtues, to find out how to feed myself and how to feed others and service to others and all those concepts, which I never really got out of my traditional Jewish background, but I got it more only after I became more Buddhist and more. There was a quote I heard from another one, somebody else, and it rang true with me: is my roots are Jewish, but my wings are Buddhist. And so basically I could tell you that Buddhism made me a better Jew, because Buddhism made me a better.
I had a similar experience. Yeah.
Because as you become a better person, you become a better whatever you are. Thich Nhat Hanh, who's also somebody I studied quite a bit, Thich Nhat Hanh said that one of his students at Plum Village was a Catholic priest. And the Catholic priest said that Buddhism made him a better Catholic. So it all sort of works together when you see it. And so I became a better Jew when I became Buddhist.
Yeah. And so when you say you became Buddhist, is this, you were more specifically in a Buddhist tradition, or was it more the meditation practice was Buddhist based? Because I know now there's a lot of conversation around, like, is it Buddhist or is it secular mindfulness? How do you see it?
Yeah, and trust me, I'm on enough message boards where all they do is argue about this crap. About do you follow the teachings of Buddha? Do you follow the rituals? Do you do this? Do you do that? And it just seems to me to be much ado about nothing. Basically,
it's not really important, right?
No, and if you do, and the Dalai Lama himself has said there is only one religion in the world, and that religion is kindness. And if we, and he also famously said, do not learn Buddhism to become a Buddhism, to be a better Buddhist. Learn Buddhism to become a better whatever you already are. And that resonated with me. But I do try to incorporate the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the Five Hindrances and all those things that are part of the Buddhist lifestyle, is basically about being a better human being. And as Buddha himself said, don't worship me, worship the teachings. Understand the teachings. I'm just a man, an awakened man, but understand the teachings. And that's what makes you Buddhist. So is it important if you're vegetarian or not? Dalai Lama says no. Are you breaking one of the 5 precepts by eating meat? There's like people arguing about this nonsense. And the fact is, just, what did somebody said? That all of Buddhism can be summed into, just don't be a jerk. So just don't be a jerk, and care about other people, and that's all it is. So that's but back to my meditation. But so when I learned my meditation. My meditation is usually self-inquiry based or metta based. I have to do metta every day, which is, for our listeners, metta is loving kindness, which can be called compassion. And in they call it positivity. But it's basically sharing your love and your compassion with others. And it's something that you send out and you are received, just like a smile. When you send out a smile, you usually receive a smile. It's kind of the same thing. And so I make sure I do that every day. It's part of my practice, and because that could change the world. And
Yes.
so I try to do metta every day. I try to do self-inquiry each day. I try to do some flow each day. And what's important to me is not anymore, it was at one point, rather than spending a lot of time on the cushion, it's just spending more time being aware and keeping it in your background and keeping your mindfulness going at all times. And, I used to say if I was going to get a tattoo, my tattoo would be a big pause button on my arm, just to remind me
Huh.
to hit pause, because usually
Yes.
the time we get into the most trouble in life is when we react instead of respond. And I think if you're practicing your meditation, if you're being mindful all day, you're responding and not reacting, and that keeps you mindful. That's what mindfulness is: taking that pause for a moment to respond.
So it sounds like you have a beautiful mix of different techniques, right? Like the metta and the insight. So how did you learn those? Did you have a teacher? Did you go to courses?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's probably, to me, the most important thing of my whole path was I was doing this on my own. And I was reading, and I could show you here in my office. I have, those big moleskin, the hard-covered moleskins, the big ones. I have dozens with thought questions and discussions and things that I wrote out, trying to understand, dissecting all the sutras and dissecting, all the different Upanishads and all that stuff, and, going to classes at Oxford online on Buddhist thought and all this stuff. And there's only a certain amount you could learn by yourself. And I ran into a teacher, this wonderful woman. I was actually on Insight Timer many years ago. And she would say, thank you for meditating. And then I carried on a conversation with her. She was out living near Philadelphia or something, and I'm here in Montreal. And I would say, well, what do you do in your practice? And she would tell me, and she opened my eyes to so many things that I used to look forward every morning to opening up her messages to see what she taught me. And she's the first person that taught me about jhana meditation, on meditation to get to the absorption states, which has always been a very big focus of mine since there, because to me, I could talk hours about jhana, but that's where it was all at. And then finally I said, okay, I was so nervous. And I wrote her and I said, her name's Tracy. And I said, Tracy, I hope you're not offended by this, but would you be my teacher? And she wrote back and said, well, that depends. What are your goals? She said, basically, she said, if you're just looking to chill out at the end of the day, you don't need me. She says, but what are your goals? And I said, well, my goals are to awaken. And my goals are to reach the highest jhanas. And she said, okay. She says, because otherwise, it's almost like going to a doctor if you have a headache. If all you're coming for is a headache, just take a couple of aspirin. You don't need to speak to a doctor. If you're just trying to chill at the end of the day, well, just go listen to some guided meditations on Insight Timer. You don't really need a teacher. But for where you're going, you do need a teacher. And
So knowing your goals seems to be very important, right?
Right.
Like, why are you doing what you're doing?
Right. And I can't even imagine the fortuitous set of events that brought me to her to me. But she claims that she's learned just as much from me being her student as I have. But what happened was, after I was all over the place, like you said, with some Buddhist meditation, with some Hindu meditation, with some Taoist thought, with all these things, she said, by the way, have you ever heard of UM? And this was about, I don't know, many years ago. I said, have you ever heard of UM? And I said, no, I haven't. She goes, well, let me tell you something. Buckle up. You're in for a ride. And she explained everything about Shinzen, about UM, and she took me through the whole thing, taught me the entire UM course structure, everything you could imagine. She'd been doing UM since the 90s, the early 90s. And, and she taught me everything about UM and mixed in some jhana and some other stuff as well. But at that point, I had this revelation. Rather than what meant to me at that point was just in the title unified mindfulness. I was looking at, well, okay, this is Buddhist, this is Hindu, this is Shinto, this is Tao, and it was like all separate. And here was that said, it's all mindfulness, it doesn't matter. And it was the first approach that unified it all to me. And
yes,
and just like title, unified mindfulness, and that's what brought it all home for me. That's when everything started to make sense.
Beautiful.
And that's how it all happens.
And so now that you have this idea of unified mindfulness, I guess, and it goes back to what we were talking about. It's not about being Buddhist or Jewish. It's what brings it all together. And what would you say, Mitch? Like, how would you define mindfulness now that you've had all these experiences? What is it all about?
I believe mindfulness is being aware of yourself, capital S self, at all times. I believe it was Shinzen that has this metaphor that he uses about a frog. And that frogs are made to live in the water and they're made to live on land. And sometimes frogs forget about the water and they end up dying on land. And sometimes they forget about land and end up dying in the water. So once we realize that as human beings, we're kind of like frogs and we have this celestial part of ourselves and this earthbound part of ourselves, and they have to live together. So, that saying, everybody knows that saying, that we are celestial beings having a human experience. That's kind of the way I see mindfulness, is reminding us that even though we're in our egoic framework where we have to go out and make a living and pay the bills and feed our stomach and take care of our kids, all those things that are so earthbound, there is part of us that is much more than that. And mindfulness allows us to be the frog going from the water to the land as we need it. That's kind of my view of mindfulness.
That's beautiful.
So
that's wonderful. And are there any, I guess you talked about that it brought some sense of love and compassion. Do you feel that you've gotten what you were looking for, in 1975 or maybe even later when you were looking to understand yourself? Do you feel that mindfulness has given you that ability? What are some of the benefits you've gained from all these years of practice?
Well, it's all, I think a lot of it is, and I would recommend everybody out there, have a really good, qualified, competent teacher. I was lucky. And what she taught me, and was the hardest lesson, and I remember that breakthrough as if it was yesterday, was self-compassion, self-love. And when I broke that, when I finally was able to love myself as much as I loved others, that's when the biggest transformation took place. And that's when I started to stop being so hard on myself. And so, like that, realizing that you are enough. Not that you're not enough. And once you realize that you are enough, to me, maybe that's not a problem with other people, but to me that was my big breakthrough, was realizing that I'm okay, that I'm enough, that I'm good, and that to love myself, it's kind of like if you're in business, you can't sell stuff that you don't have in your warehouse, right? You got to be able to send it out.
Yes.
So if you want to send out love, well, then you got to have love for yourself also. It all just works for, you can't send something you don't have. So it got me to open up to love myself. And when I started to love myself, when I can go into all the different Eastern thought behind your heart sutra, your heart center and yoga, all that stuff, your chakras, all that. But basically all it comes down to is once you love yourself as much as you can love other people, well, then your heart grows and you're in a much, much better place.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Lovely. And so what does your practice look like now? In TME, we talk about having your formal practice that you do, either seated or, when you have like time alone, and informal practice that you do during the day. And we also include give support and get support as part of your overall practice. So what does that look like to you now? And also, are there any challenges that you're facing now, and how are you using your daily practice to address those?
All really good questions. Basically, I start the morning. I still get up early, and I start the morning with. I've cut it down, so I only sit for an hour now in the morning when I get up, and I divide that into 3 parts. I start with a feel rest. I always like to start with feel rest to get me into a place where I'd like to be, and from there I go into flow, and I usually end my hour sit with a positivity, feel good. It's mostly aimed towards gratitude. I then get up and I spend another half an hour with a practice in motion. It's walking my dog usually. And so I do a practice in motion. It's still early and this time of year it's still dark. But I go out with the dog and I do a practice in motion for half an hour. And then I go into my day. So basically I've had an hour and a half of formal meditation at that time, one seated and one in motion. Then at around lunchtime, I'll just take a half hour to recenter, and I'll do a quick half hour meditation, which could. I try to stay to transcendence just to, because I've already spent the morning doing stuff, and maybe I'm a little stressed or whatever, and I just use a quick half hour after lunch to cleanse myself, and then after supper, I'll do another quick half hour of metta, just because I'm so happy that I made it to this point. Another day gone, another day full of love and happiness and wonderfulness, and so I just give it. It's a gratitude thing and sending love to all the people I care, and that's my formal. But during the day, I try to stay focused with a background meditation. For those who don't know what background meditation is, it's putting anywhere from 10% to 25% or whatever of a meditation in the background while you go through your life, whatever that is, whether it's work or play or whatever, just keeping that in the background. And I think that's probably more important than the sits. I don't know if you know the great Buddhist nun Pema Chodron, but she basically said, if you sit for an hour in the morning and sit for an hour at night and are not mindful in between, then you just wasted those 2 sits. So, and I agree with her. So I try to stay with a background meditation throughout the day. For me, I do equanimity, a background equanimity, or a background metta. It's whatever works at the time. And that's my mindfulness sort of schedule for the day. But you asked if there was any challenges. There's always challenges, but there's also sometimes hidden rewards. As you well know, I recently became a grandfather, and the love.
Congrats.
Thank you, but the love for that little baby raised my base level metta so much every time I see his face and hold him in my arms that it was like a boost to all my other practices, because it's like my heart grew. Just from this wonderful little child. So we not only have obstacles, which we all do, with the triggers, and until we're bodhisattva, until we self-actualize, we're all going to have obstacles where we act, as I call it, less skillfully than we should. The question is how quick we can get ourselves back into that wonderful place. But there's also these wonderful hidden pluses, like this child, that just makes everything better. And and that's kind of just what life is like, figuring out when you reacted less than skillfully and adjusting that, apologizing or bringing yourself back to a spiritual level, and reaping the benefits of added flow when you just feel love. So sometimes I was just with a student of mine recently, and he was just telling me that he was sitting around at dinner with his family, and just for a moment, he got this overwhelming feeling of love for everybody at that table, his wife, his kids, his parents, whoever was sitting there at that table. And he says, it's not that I don't always feel, but there was just like almost like an adrenaline rush for a couple of moments of this huge amount of sharing the love of all that around them. And I said, yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh calls that a moment of enlightenment, that we have moments of enlightenment and we should appreciate that. And so, yeah, so those are the things that like you say to yourself, well, this is why I go through this practice. This is why I do this. Being here with,
Yeah, that's such a wonderful insight when we start to realize that the benefits of practice aren't just in, oh, I had a lot of people say like a good meditation because my mind didn't wander, right? Or because I felt very easeful in my meditation. But what I hear you saying is that it's more about how does this impact the rest of your day? Are you able to notice when you go off track and then come back and apologize or repair? Are you able to really enjoy the beauty of these moments that sometimes might go, unnoticed because we're going here and there, like just sitting at the table, or even when it's a beautiful moment, like having a grandchild, to really be able to almost taste it and feel it in your body, that each day is a real gift, right? And that there's so many moments that we often don't notice when we're just going from here to there, and that mindfulness kind of allows you to have that lens, that clarity to really see what's happening. So that's so wonderful.
well, it's like I said,
It's great to see.
it's like pushing that pause button again.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's like pushing that pause button.
Yes.
So we
Yes.
just pause and say, wow, look how wonderful it
Yes.
is. I have these people around me who love me. I'm feeling good. Or, man, I got cut off in traffic and I flipped the guy the bird. That wasn't very skillful. I'm going to pause and just like raise my hands up and realize that that was not a great way to act. So either way, once you pause, you could either appreciate what is going on, or you could appreciate the better way you should have handled something. So it's all good. And
Yeah.
I don't remember which one of I don't remember who said this, but they said we don't meditate to become a better meditator. We meditate to become a better person. And that's what this is all about. So hopefully I'm a better person each day, hopefully.
And I would think that also motivates you to then continue, right? Because I know a lot of students, especially when they start, the discipline is really hard. Like, while, you were saying you sit formally for an hour and then a couple half hours later, that would be really challenging for people. So I'm curious, did you ever have challenges with discipline, with doing the practice? And were the benefits what motivated you, or how did you motivate yourself to keep going?
Yeah, it's definitely hard. But any endeavor that we take that means something requires discipline. I was a runner for a while, and until I got injured. But it would be like a Montreal winter, and it's I don't know, let's say 10 degrees below zero, and you're going, damn, I don't want to go out in that. But if you say no, then the next day you're going to say no, and the next day you're going to say no, and you're just going to lose whatever edge you were working on. So nobody likes running in 10 degree below weather. Nobody enjoys that. But it's something you got to do. It's part of your discipline. And with meditation, if you tell yourself, well, this is part of my life, this is like brushing my teeth, you have to do this. Some sits, like you mentioned, some sits are going to be less profound than others. But you're always gaining, whether you realize it or not. You're always gaining from it. And if you make it part of your life, you're going to benefit, and you just have to have that discipline. Yes, discipline's not easy. Shinzen tells stories of, 100 days in the cold, sitting throughout the winter in some small place in Japan by himself, or in the desert in a sweat lodge, or in all these crazy stories. It's discipline. You need it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's so true. It's such a good thing for us to develop discipline. And also, what's beautiful about TME is that you can also find the ways to do it that you enjoy the most. So you mentioned that part of your formal practice is walking your dog. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that that can be considered a meditation practice, but in our system it actually can be, because if you're focusing on what you see, hear, and feel in the moment, that's 100% attention on a technique, and that's a formal practice, right? So that's a gift too of this type of meditation practice, that it's not like one thing that if you hate it, it's like you just got to keep doing the thing you hate. You can actually find within the scope of meditation practices that are so many, something that you enjoy. And maybe, Mitch, you can tell us a bit more about TME, how you developed that, and what it means to you, and how it can help some of our listeners.
Yeah, TME is obviously very personal to me. I just ran into so many people as students, and I'd say, if you want to learn, I could teach you. And they're going, oh, I could never learn meditation. I tried that breathing thing, and it just doesn't work for me. So I know I can't meditate. And I kept hearing that in different ways, and different ways people would express that same thought. They tried one thing that somebody told them was the way to meditate, and they weren't comfortable with it. So then they gave up the idea of meditation completely, because they had let's face it, a crappy instructor who told them that this is the only way to do something. And so I actually said this is not the way it is. There's a way to happiness. That's all this is happiness, right? It's a way to, as we discussed earlier, happiness independent of conditions. And the only way to get there is to find out what makes you happy, and sometimes St. calls this a psycho-spiritual journey. And, if you're in psychotherapy, there's going to be a lot of times you're with your therapist and you're going to break down crying, and you're just going to be horrible, and you're going to feel crappy, but you feel better after for it. And a lot of meditation is like that too. You don't want to go out and I really don't want to go sit, and you go in saying, well, I have to, but it'll be worthwhile after. It's because it's like the muscles in the gym. You just got to keep exercising them. And even though you're saying, well, that wasn't a great sit, and it was. It was. And, be kinder to yourself. Mm-hmm. It was. And so you really have to, so when it came to me, I said, we really have to reach all these people who somehow say, no, I can never do that. I guarantee you can. You would just have a messed up definition of what you think meditation is and what you think you're capable and not capable of. But anybody can meditate. You just have to have the right instructor that will find what works for you. Dalai Lama said that if every 8-year-old child was taught to meditate, we would have the end of violence in one generation. So if we could teach 8-year-olds to meditate, we could teach anybody to meditate.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love it too, this idea that you can find your own way, your own path to work with your own mind, because all our minds are so different, right? Like I like to think of us as flowers, and what works for a rose isn't the same thing that works for a sunflower, right? So we need to find what's unique to us. And then I guess I'm curious about that quote about the Dalai Lama. Why do you think that is, that if we meditated, the world would be better? Because that also gets to a criticism that I've heard, that meditation is very selfish, right? Like it's about you going off and doing this thing for yourself. Shouldn't you be out helping the world? There's so many problems in the world. Like, why aren't we out there doing stuff instead of just sitting there? So what do you see the connection between us doing this practice for ourselves and then making the world better? Because it might not be obvious to a lot of people.
Well, I know that you're familiar with the happiness grid, but for those of you who aren't familiar with the happiness grid, it's something that Shinzen developed to explain the different types of happiness, and the highest level of happiness is service to others, and or as they call it now, connection. Am I right? I think it's called connection now. And when it goes back to my theory of self-love as well, that you could only love others once you have enough love inside you. So you do have to spend time finding out who you are before you could start helping others. And that's what like I said, that was my big breakthrough, was finding out that I'm okay as whatever I am. And then I was able to help others. And I always say it's kind of like, if I see a really good movie, I can't wait to get back and tell my friends, you got to go see this movie. It was excellent. Or I just read this great book. You got to read this book. So I've come across a process, you call it mindfulness meditation, whatever you want to call it. I've come across this process that's infinitely made me happier and infinitely changed my life for the better. And I want to tell everybody about it, because I want everybody's life to get better the way mine has, or to get happier the way mine has. And that's the service to others. And that's what makes me happy, is when you're a teacher as well. And when a student will say, I start every single session with a student with, how was the past week? And they'll go on with some report about how they handled something differently than they would have before you were teaching them, and how skillful, and how, or something that used to trigger them doesn't trigger them, and how, whatever. And you hear that, and my life is so much better just hearing how his life got better. And that's kind of why we do this, I guess. This is why I do it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There is such a connection, right? The way we are affects the people around us. And a little bit earlier, I got interrupted by my kids. And for a while, I used to think, the kids are interrupting my meditation. I need to just kind of be in the zone, and they're like a distraction. And then over time, I learned that actually they're the teacher, like whatever's in the moment, including your child needing something, that's your new focus of attention. And so I know for me, it's made me, I'm not a perfect mom by any means, but a better mom when I can actually turn to them and pay attention to them. And I know, Mitch, you're a dad and you're a grandpa now. Any tips for those of us with young kids? Yeah. How does the mindfulness help you with your parenting and your wonderful marriage? And
you know what?
And all of those things.
We're always going to be challenged, and you're going to get triggered, if you will, at different points. I was listening to a podcast by Tara Brach recently, and I think she's wonderful. And she's been doing this an awful long time. But she was relating a story that she was working on a talk or something, and she was busy working away, and her kids were little at the time, and there was one that was bugging her for, I don't know if he wanted something to eat, or he wanted to go outside, and he was just bugging her, and she snapped at him, saying, just give me another 20 minutes, I have to finish this, I have a podcast to do, or whatever, and she snapped at him, and he walked away, angry, or sad, and it hit her right away about how unskillfully she handled that. This is Tara Brach, who deals with this stuff on a much deeper level than probably you and I do. And she realized at that moment how bad she reacted. And she used the RAIN technique, if you're familiar with the RAIN technique, and that brought her back. I use SODA. People have different acronyms. But it brought her back to her spiritual side, and she went back to her child, and she hugged him and apologized, and they went out and played or whatever they did. So it's not going to stop you from doing those things, but hopefully it'll help you realize what you did and be able to repair that sooner rather than later. So we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to be bodhisattva. Maybe one day, but chances are we're not going to be bodhisattva. But the point is to realize when we do sort of veer off that better track and get back on it with love. And just remember that
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I love the repair, that we don't have to be perfect, and going back to that idea that we're enough as we are, that we're imperfect human beings, so we're going to make mistakes, and the more we can have compassion with ourselves, that helps our kids too. And sometimes when I'm feeling stressed with the kids and everything going on, I can just kind of stop and Tara talks about this too, like put a hand on my heart and just be like, wow, this is a hard moment.
Right.
And just acknowledging that for myself keeps me at times from, snapping at them, because it's a lot, right? And that also connects with equanimity, that life isn't always pleasant or unpleasant, but we can learn, and this is something that's strengthened with mindfulness practice, and I know, Mitch, you love equanimity, that we can learn to be with the unpleasant a little bit more.
Well, usually the unpleasant is a better teacher than the pleasant.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And it makes us strong.
Yeah,
we grow.
And that.
So I know I've been.
I'm just saying that
Go ahead.
When that's usually that these terrible challenges that we face, it's usually because we haven't figured out the lesson we have to learn from that challenge, and that once we learn whatever lesson that challenge was meant to teach us, then it stops being a challenge. So it comes back to, like you said, learning from all this stuff.
Yeah. Is there an example of that in your life?
Oh, so many.
Is there an example of that in your life? Yeah.
So many. I'll give you, this is a funny story, actually. The day before my daughter's wedding, I had an accident and I lost my front tooth. Okay. And now I got to drive.
Oh,
yeah.
No.
And I got to drive to Toronto for her wedding, and I have a front tooth missing. It wasn't even a back tooth where you could fake it. It was a front tooth. I fell. And I'm flipping out completely, and thinking, because, I have wedding pictures from my grandparents. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to be in these pictures. They're going to last forever and ever. My great-great-grandchild, when they're showing them, is going to be some idiot without a front tooth. And I was just beyond upset. And my dentist, who's also my cousin, I call her up. I'm leaving messages at night because it happened in the evening, and she's not answering. I'm texting her, and she's not answering. And in the morning, I'm doing my sit, and I'm having a hard time with the sit because I'm just focusing on what am I going to do? I'm going to have to go through a whole wedding pictures and everything without smiling, and all this stuff. And I finally get right after my set, my cousin finally calls me, sees all the messages that I left her, and I said, I'm going to Toronto. I'm going to go, Katie's getting married and I'm going to Toronto. She goes, okay, no problem. Calm down. Do you think I'm going to let you take a crappy picture? She says, you're going to come into the office. We'll take a cast. I'll put a temporary one in front. You come back from the wedding. We'll do an implant. Everything will be, don't worry about it. And it was like, oh my goodness, it's all taken care of. And I realized at that moment, the lesson that I had to learn was I had this horrible vanity thing going on. I'm going to look terrible for these pictures. It was all about me. It wasn't about the wedding and my daughter being married anymore. It was about how bad I'm going to look. And that's where I put my focus rather than on the equanimity of, we'll deal with this. And I should have known that my dentist, my cousin, would never let me look like an idiot. So the lesson I learned was, stop thinking about yourself so much and don't take your eye off the big prize, which is this beautiful experience of your daughter getting married or whatever. And it all worked out fine. But that was the lesson that I had to be reminded of.
That's such a great story, and I'm sure we can all relate. And also, I'm just imagining, because the thoughts at those times, they just keep going and going, and you're trying to fix it. To remind ourselves next time we go through it, which I'm sure we will, that we can just kind of step back a little bit from all those thoughts, that somehow things do tend to work out, like in one way or another, they're going to work out. And that's something that mindfulness has helped me with as well, because I'm such a planner and organizer and strategizer, but sometimes you can't always be in the future. You just have to trust, right, the process of it, and it all worked out beautifully.
I like to remind my students that things are never quite as bad as we imagine they will be.
Yes, I like that.
So that's about it.
So maybe before we close, Mitch, I've really enjoyed speaking with you. It's been such a gift, and I love working with you. I guess if you could tell us a bit about in the next, 3 months, what do you see your life, your practice, your work going? Where do you see it all going? And also, do you have a message to share with our listeners today around, TME or mindfulness?
Yeah, I have, like I said, I've been doing this an awful long time. I'm a grandpa. And I've never been as excited about the future as I am right now, having the backup and the incredible sharing of knowledge between you and Dave and everybody else in building this TME. It just seems so right to me, so big. It seems like bigger than anything. The fact that we could bring this feeling of anybody can find a way to make their life better through meditation is so huge. Like it humbles me that that we could do this. And I don't think I could have done this. I know I couldn't have done this by myself. But it just seems that like somehow whatever forces of nature were around put us together, and we're all on the same page, and we all have this wonderful thing to make mindfulness open to just about everybody. And so I'm so excited over the next few months to get our courses out there and to get people meditating, to get people changing their lives for the better. I can't even tell you how excited I wake up each morning, just more excited about getting this done with people I have such high admiration for and so proud to be part of a team with. So yeah, that's what's on board for the next foreseeable future. And as far, if I have to leave anybody with anything, it's don't be the frog that dries up on the land because he forgot about the water. We are all such wonderful, beautiful creatures. Try to find that spot within you that is that pure light that we all have within us. I believe meditation will help. There's other ways. But realize that you are enough. You're beautiful and light and just full of awesomeness. Remember that, and don't let anybody tell you you're less, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't find that part of you. You can.
Thank you so much, Mitch. So lovely to be together.
Thank you, Paula. Always a pleasure talking with you.
We'll talk again
Absolutely.
soon.